Hi, and welcome to my book review, a book report, based on this book, A Cry from the Streets, by Jeanette Lacasse. I chose this book because I read a book by Brother Andrew years ago called God's Smuggler, and his story really inspired me, and he wrote the foreword to this book, A Cry from the Streets. So I thought, well, that's a good start. Also, this book's about a Dutch couple, and obviously Kajan and Renette have left now, and when I knew they were leaving, I kind of wanted to read about another Dutch couple and their introduction to missions through YWAM. So this is the book I've chosen. The first 4 chapters were great. There just seemed lots of similarities really between this couple, Jeanette and Johan, and Gemma and me. Firstly, because when Jeanette was just 6 years old, she had this sense that she was going to be a missionary when she was older, which is a bit like Gemma, who made a similar comment when she was a child. It just made me think about how sometimes God gives us missionary hearts even when we're young, even if He shares before we actually discover them fully. The other thing is that this Dutch couple went on their DTS when Jeanette was pregnant, and they arrived on their DTS with way too much stuff, which felt a bit like us with our huge bags and trying to find where on earth we were going to store our stuff. I can't quite imagine doing this DTS with a baby like they did, though their baby slept through most of the classes, and so yeah, it worked out for them. It's really cool that they did their outreach in Greece, and they actually went on board the Anastasis, which is that ship, if you remember in Lauren Cunningham's book, Is That Really You, God?, that there was a lot of trouble over. They boarded the ship just to see what it was like, and the storm hit, which meant they had to stay on board for 3 days, and they felt God tell them that this is where they needed to stay and work on the ship. So they're part of the team that had to fast and pray for funds because the ship was in such bad condition. They were also there when the 8,301 fish jumped onto the beach during their fasting period. So it's really nice to read those stories again from their perspective. And it was really hard for them to be on board the ship, not to be able to even afford toothpaste, especially when they knew they'd got family members back home who were really sick in Holland. And it was just quite moving to read of their sacrifices of finances and family, and again, kind of could relate to that a bit. They were on the ship for 2 years, and then they went on a course in Hawaii at the University of the Nations, all about how to work with street kids. The base in Hawaii was completely luxury really compared to the base they'd end up going to in Brazil. When they were told about where they'd be living, in tents and eating mostly beans and rice, they wondered if they'd be able to cope. But actually it turned out to be better than they thought, and ended up in a brick-built structure. The town they worked in, Belo Horizonte, in Brazil, was quite an amazing place, and they really felt God wanted to use them there. They had street kids that they were mainly ministering to, and they were a really rough group of kids. Similar probably to some of the kids you might find in Zambia. Gone onto the street to try and earn money for their parents, but then realised they'd be better off if they just kept the money themselves and lived on the streets, but then end up scavenging for food, stealing, prostituting themselves, and often getting high on solvents. In Zambia it would be bostic, put into a bottle to sniff to make you high, and it was a similar situation in Brazil. The kids were so violent, sometimes, in fact most weeks, about 3 children would be killed, murdered by other gangs and other children on the street. When they started to take these kids into their home, and they built a hostel for them to stay during the day sometimes, they had to change all their cutlery to being plastic cutlery, because otherwise the children would run in, open the kitchen drawers, grab a knife and try and stab one another. And yet their lives were transformed by hearing the gospel. Some of these street kids ended up going on to do DTSs themselves. One of them went to work in the Amazon jungles. But it was a risk for Johan and Jeanette to take these kids in, to risk their own biological children by caring for these street kids. They just had to hope that all their work would pay off, and that their own kids would actually grow in faith and see that Jesus loves them and can turn their lives around too. that gave me courage to think that with doing this DTS and pursuing God's call on our lives, my kids will be blessed too, even if it's sacrificial at times. Despite ending up with over 100 staff manning lots of different houses for all sorts of children with different needs, the most amazing thing really for me was seeing this couple take in 2 disabled children. One, a little baby girl called Dilma that they found in a box with kittens who turned out to be deaf, and the other, a little boy called Davy who was paralysed. Neither of them were healed, and they found that difficult, but it led them to creating more ministries for deaf children and those with disabilities. Though Johan and Jeanette still live in Brazil, their work stretches much further. They started their own University of the Nations course so that people would come to them to learn how to work with street kids. And so they've got connections with YWAM everywhere. People going to them, being trained, and then going to other nations to work with those street kids. In Brazil, the attitude of the police was radically changed towards street children. Instead of them being seen as a nuisance and the cause of so many problems in society, they started to see that these children could be transformed as they met with Jesus. And so the ministry of Jeanette and Johan went from strength to strength. Always with sacrifice, always with risk, then that's the key to adventure, isn't it? This has been a great book. I'm really glad I chose it. Bit of a lucky choice, I think. But yeah, if you have time, why not read it yourself? Okay, excellent. Bye.